The sound of a siren cut through the cold air as a BMW screeched to a halt on the edge of my lake. Two figures in bright yellow vests stepped out, one holding a clipboard like it was a weapon. My breath fogged the cold air as I stared, knowing exactly why they were here. Mr. McAdler, the man called, his voice tight. We've got permits for the entire lake. You need to leave.
You need to resolve
I
this
didn't
now.
move. I just sat there in my folding chair, the same chair I've sat in for 37 winters.
There is nothing
But
to
then I
talk
reached
about.
into my pocket and pulled out the stack of documents. This wasn't about fishing anymore. It was about to get ugly, and the lake was the last place they should have messed with. Karen Monroe wasn't the kind of woman who blended in. She had a way of walking into a room and making it colder even in the summer. Short, plump, with a smile too wide to be sincere, she quickly made herself the unofficial queen of Snow Ridge Heights. No one ever really voted her into power. She simply took it. Her first step was the newsletter, full of helpful suggestions, always with a layer of passive aggression. A new rule here, a new regulation there. Before long, she had the community wrapped around her finger. But she wasn't satisfied. No, Karen needed more. It started small, more meetings, more committees, more decisions, without asking anyone else. It wasn't about making the neighborhood better. It was about controlling it. And then she set her sights on the lake on my lake. She came to my door one late afternoon, her clipboard in hand. Mr. McAdler, she said, the words sweet but sharp. We're conducting a review. The lake's now a community asset, and we need you to cooperate. I stared at her, feeling the temperature drop in my own home. I own this lake, I said, a smile pulling at the corner of my lips. Her eyes tightened, the mask of politeness slipping for a second. We'll be looking into that. And that was the moment I knew. Karen Monroe wasn't just an annoyance. She was a problem I was ready to solve. For as long as I could remember, Hollow Pine Lake was home. The lake was more than just a body of water. It was the heartbeat of my family. It had seen 3 generations of McAdlers, each of us carving out our place in the cold, silent expanse of ice. My father had taught me to fish here, and I'd passed it down to my son. Now I was alone, surrounded by memories that had been frozen in time, just like the lake itself. The cabin I lived in was the same one my parents built after the war. It wasn't much weathered wood and patched roofs, but it was home. I could hear my father's voice sometimes when I sat by the fire, or feel the warmth of Marianne's hand in mine when I fished, even though she'd passed 5 years ago. The lake wasn't just a place to fish. It was a part of me, part of my family's history. It was here that my grandfather homesteaded the land in the 1,930 seconds, and it was here that I could escape the world. The land had always been ours, passed down through the generations. Back then, before Snow Ridge Heights was even a thought, we lived on McAdler Stretch, a stretch of land as wild as the lake itself. But in the early 2000s, everything started changing. Developers rolled in, slapping a fancy name on the land, and creating a neighborhood full of shiny new homes and pristine lawns. Snow Ridge Heights, they called it. I kept to myself, kept my distance from the neighbors. My property was on the edge of their pristine world, a stubborn reminder that the land had a history they didn't understand. But that didn't stop them from making changes, trying to turn everything into a picture-perfect suburb. They built their fancy clubhouse, held their seasonal events, and acted like the lake was part of their new world. I'd never attended a meeting, never had to. The lake was mine, and the deed was as solid as the ice beneath me. But with Karen's rise to power, everything started shifting. It wasn't about keeping the roads plowed anymore. It was about control. Her control. And I was starting to feel the heat of her influence even on the coldest days of winter. Karen Monroe and her HOA weren't just a nuisance. They were the beginning of something much worse. And that something was about to clash with everything I'd spent my life protecting. It started with a letter, an official notice from the HOA hand-delivered by one of Karen's minions. Unauthorized use of community lake, it read. Please refrain from all fishing activities until further notice. Safety concerns. They were subtle at first, these little threats. I thought it was just a glitch, a misunderstanding, but the letter made it clear they were testing the waters. I stared at it for a long time, then folded it up slowly, my fingers gripping the paper tight. I could feel the tension building already. The lake had been mine long before their rules, their shiny homes, and their HOA. But I kept quiet, didn't make a scene. After all, who needs a fight over a piece of paper? But that was just the beginning. They weren't done. The following week, I noticed someone watching me from the tree line. Not just once, but several times, a figure in a fluorescent vest standing just out of view, studying me like a specimen. The paranoia started setting in, creeping into my bones like the cold. They were trying to make me feel small, irrelevant, but I wasn't backing down. It wasn't long before they crossed the line. I was sitting by the ice, just getting the hole ready, when I saw the bright orange flags in the distance. A crew of HOA volunteers staking out signs along my shoreline. The familiar man from the previous letter, Robert I think his name was there, hammering in a sign that read, "No fishing. OA, Lake Zone." I stood up immediately, snow crunching beneath my boots as I walked towards them. The cold air bit at my face. "Get off my land," I said, my voice low but firm. Robert glanced at the others, the younger man, looking uncomfortable. "We're just following orders," he muttered. "No one told you to put a sign on my property," I replied, my hands trembling, but not from the cold. They looked at each other, but no one moved. I stepped closer, my voice harder now. "This is my land, and if you're going to trespass, we'll be doing this the hard way." The older man just shrugged. "Take it up with Karen." And that's when I knew. Karen was behind this. She was testing how far she could push me, and I was getting close to the breaking point. The next week, my ice shack was vandalized. I came out one morning, coffee in hand, to find the small plywood structure trashed. The window had been shattered, the door left wide open, as if someone had rifled through it. Nothing of value was missing, but that didn't matter. What mattered was the message. I took a few deep breaths, trying to steady my nerves. My first instinct was to call the sheriff, but I stopped myself. I knew this was bigger than just some kids causing trouble. This was the HOA trying to break me. I spent the next hour cleaning up the mess, fixing the window as best I could. It wasn't just about the cabin, it was about my pride, my connection to the lake, and they were taking that from me piece by piece. A few days later, I noticed something strange. My snowmobile was gone. Just vanished, parked in the exact spot where I'd left it. No one had the guts to take it directly, but the tracks leading to the tree line were unmistakable. They were escalating now. I had no doubt the HOA was behind it. They wanted me gone, wanted me to give up my fight, but they had no idea who they were dealing with. I wasn't going anywhere. The sheriff showed up the morning after my snowmobile disappeared. He was a younger guy, just doing his job, but I could see the awkwardness in his posture as he approached my cabin. "Mr. McAdler, I'm here about the complaint. The HOA said you're interfering with their Winterfest preparations." I couldn't help but laugh. Interfering. They're setting up on my land without a permit, without any authority. He shifted uncomfortably, glancing at the paperwork in his hand. "They've got some concerns, and I don't care about their concerns." I cut him off, my voice sharp now. "This is private property. I've been fishing here for 37 years, and they have no right to tell me otherwise." The sheriff sighed, glancing down at his notes. "I'm just the messenger. I can't do anything unless they file a formal complaint." "Then let them," I said, voice steady. "I'll be right here fishing, like I always do." He didn't argue. The sheriff knew this was beyond him. He just nodded, handed me the paper, and left. The warning didn't faze me, but it sure as hell let me know how far Karen and her HOA would go. Then came the big event, the Winterfest. It wasn't just some family gathering or community celebration. No, this was the HOA's way of taking control. I'd seen the banners go up, the rental trucks rolling in. They were turning the lake into a festival ground, complete with a DJ booth, ice skating, even food trucks. And the worst part, they hadn't even bothered to ask. Not one word to me. It was as if the lake was theirs now, like it had always belonged to them. I couldn't just sit back anymore. The lake wasn't just a piece of land, it was part of who I was, who my family was. And I wasn't about to let them erase that. The morning before the event was supposed to kick off, I made a call, one I'd been dreading, but knew I had to make. Bennett Ditt, my old contact at the Department of Environmental Quality, answered on the first ring. "Bennett, I need your help," I said, voice tight with frustration. "I'm listening," he replied, already knowing what was coming. I laid it out: no permits, no approvals, and a complete disregard for private property rights. If they want to throw this party, they need to do it legally, and they won't. "I'll make some calls," Bennett said, voice steady. "We'll take it from here." I hung up, feeling the first real rush of hope I'd felt in months. This wasn't just about fishing anymore. It was about to get real. And Karen Monroe had no idea what was coming. The HOA held their emergency meeting the following Thursday, the clubhouse packed with people, neighbors, HOA members, and a few outsiders who had clearly heard about the fiasco. Karen was there, of course, sitting at the head of the table, smiling, like everything was still under control. I stood at the front, calm as I could manage, holding up the stack of evidence I'd been collecting for weeks. The deed to the lake, the satellite maps, photos of every trespassing volunteer, the letters they'd sent me. My hands shook a little, but only because I was eager to finally lay this out. "Mr. Mackler," Karen began, her voice sugary, sweet, but I could hear the tension there. "We're simply trying to make the community better. We have the right to enhance the experience for everyone." "You're right," I interrupted, my voice firm. You have no right. This lake, this land, it's mine. It's been in my family for 3 generations. I let that hang in the air for a moment. Karen's smile faltered just slightly, but enough for everyone in the room to notice. The crowd was listening now, every word I spoke, cutting through the usual pleasantries. This is your doing, Karen, I said, and it's over. Her lips pressed into a thin line. She tried to dismiss me, but the room wasn't on her side anymore. Not after everything I showed them. I started dropping the evidence one piece at a time, letting it sink in slowly. First, the maps showing that the lake was entirely within my parcel boundaries. There was no shared space, no community lake. The HOA's own survey was wrong. Then I handed over the photos of their volunteers staking signs on my property without permission. Each image was time-stamped, each one clear and damning. I laid out the letters they had sent, including the one from Karen herself. I read aloud the part where she had ordered me to cease fishing, claiming that my activities interfered with their community activities. I could hear the gasps around the room. No one had known the full extent of the HOA's illegal overreach. Then I showed them the permits, or rather the lack of them. No public assembly clearance, no zoning changes, nothing. The event they were planning was a blatant violation of city ordinances. Karen's smug facade was cracking, but she held on for dear life. Everything you've done has been illegal, I said, finishing with the documents from Bennett and the Department of Environmental Quality, and I've got proof of it all. The silence in the room was deafening. Karen's hands trembled ever so slightly as she picked up the papers I had handed her, reading through them quickly, her face turning a shade of red I hadn't seen before. The room was quiet, waiting. She looked up at me, then back at the crowd, as if searching for a way out. Her usual composed demeanor was slipping, and it was becoming painfully clear to everyone that she had been caught red-handed. "You don't understand," she began, voice shaky. "The community needs this. This is for everyone's enjoyment." The room wasn't buying it anymore. A few people spoke up, sharing how they'd been misled. Others shook their heads, disappointed in Karen's manipulations. And then, one by one, the board members started to stand. Carol, the retired principal, was the first. "This isn't the community spirit we were promised, Karen," she said, her voice steady, but her words sharp. The others followed until only a handful of the original board members remained seated. And Karen, she sat frozen in place, her eyes wide, her mouth silent. The room had turned against her. I moved to remove Karen Monroe from the HOA board, effective immediately. Carol declared, her voice echoing through the room. A vote was held, and it passed in an overwhelming landslide, 47-3. Karen's reign was over. As the votes were counted, Karen stood abruptly gathering her things, but not before casting one last venomous glare at me. She didn't say anything, didn't fight back. She just turned and walked out of the room. No goodbye, no last words, just a defeated figure leaving behind the wreckage of her control. I stood there, the weight of the victory settling in, but not for long. I still had work to do. The fight wasn't over. After Karen's departure, the room was filled with a quiet, stunned silence. Then people started to move. Neighbors and HOA members alike approached me, offering their apologies. Some were sincere, some awkward, but I could feel the weight lifting off the community. Carol, the retired principal, was the first to approach. "Jack, I'm sorry. We should have listened to you sooner." I shook her hand firmly. "It's not too late," I said. Later, I sat on my porch watching the lake, its surface still as glass. The snow had fallen lightly, covering the scars of the past few weeks. Mary Ann's absence was always there, but for the first time in a long while, I felt a quiet peace settle over me. The battle was over, but the fight for the lake was what had brought everyone back together. The next morning, I received a letter from the zoning office. The Winterfest event was unauthorized, and the HOA was fined for violating city ordinances. The icing on the cake was the review of the HOA's operations, which would shake things up even further. The town had finally seen Karen for what she was, and the HOA board would be forced to clean up the mess she'd made. I didn't care about the fines, though. What mattered was that the lake was free, and Karen's stranglehold was broken. The land would remain mine, and the community would respect it. Then, just when I thought I could finally rest, Barry from the HOA guard post came by. He handed me a thermos of real coffee. "I didn't know, Jack," he said quietly. "About the permits, about everything." I took the thermos, our hands brushing. "It's all right, Barry. But you know now." As he walked away, I watched him glance back at the lake. "It's always been yours, hasn't it?" "Yeah," I said softly, "it has." A few days later, I found a letter in my mailbox. No return address. Inside, several former board members and residents had signed a note. "We lost sight of what this place was meant to be. You reminded us. Thank you." I tucked it into my binder of evidence, knowing that it was a small, final victory. By the next winter, the HOA had been restructured. The new board respected the lake and its true owner. More importantly, people began to ask first before stepping onto the ice. A small group of neighbors, once silent, came forward and thanked me for holding on. Marianne's memory was still with me, but the lake had become something else, something shared. A father and son came by one morning asking for permission to fish. A couple skated quietly, just the two of them, no music or lights. They all understood now, without needing to be told. I still fished alone sometimes, but I wasn't the only one on the ice. And when the lake froze over again, I went back to my usual spot, the same hole, the same green coat, and the same dented thermos. That morning, as I drilled the hole and set my line, I caught a glimpse of something beneath the ice, a ripple of light. For a moment I thought I saw Marianne reflected in the water. It was just a flash, but it made me smile. I reeled in a small perch not worth keeping, but it didn't matter. I slipped it back through the hole, watching it dart away. The lake, like the memories, would always endure. And when I left that day, I buried Marianne's mitten beneath the ash tree, where it had always belonged. No ceremony, no fanfare, just a quiet thank you to the woman who taught me that love, like the land, is something worth holding on to.